Picking up from our last discussion on the Sophists' role in the 5th century Enlightenment, let's dive deeper into one of their most defining intellectual tools, the distinction between physis and nomos. This wasn't just some abstract philosophical exercise, it was practically baked into their identity as teachers of rhetoric and public speaking. Think of it as their go-to framework for analyzing the world around them, especially when it came to society, law, and what makes us human. We'll see how this simple-sounding pair of terms opened up a whole new way of thinking about norms versus nature. Alright, let's break down physis first. The word itself is tied to growth, birth, becoming. It's not just about the physical stuff we're made of, though that's part of it. Think of Aristotle's take. Things that exist by nature have their own internal drive, their own source of motion. He famously declared, humans are naturally political animals. Now notice the emphasis on naturally. It means we're political animals regardless of whether we like it or try to change it. Gorgias puts it bluntly, things have the nature they happen to have, not the one we wish they had. Even in ancient medicine, physis referred to someone's inherent constitution, the baseline you work with. So physis is basically the unchangeable, underlying reality of things, the way things are, independent of what we humans decide or do. It's the raw material, if you will. Now nomos, this one's a bit trickier. It clearly means law, rules, customs. But before the Sophists really ran with it, nomos often meant something more than just human-made laws. Think back to Hesiod. Zeus gives us justice, which is a form of nomos. Heraclitus says human laws are fed by the divine law. Pindar even talks about nomos being king over mortals and immortals. And who can forget Sophocles' Antigone? Creon's edict is nomos, but so is Antigone's adherence to divine law, also called nomos. If both human and divine laws are seen as ultimate, unchangeable forces governing us, how do you make a sharp distinction between nomos and physis? You can't easily pit them against each other if they're both seen as fundamental constraints. The game changer has to be redefining nomos. So, how did the Sophists manage this crucial step? How did they turn nomos from potentially divine, or at least deeply ingrained, into something clearly human-made? It seems two big intellectual currents were flowing around this time, creating the right conditions. First, people started noticing just how different the rules and customs nomoi were across various societies. Second, there was a growing interest in stories about how civilization itself began, tracing humanity's journey from some kind of primitive state to organized societies with laws and norms. These trends didn't automatically create the physis-nomos split, but they definitely made the idea of nomos as purely human-constructed feel more plausible, more thinkable. Let's look at evidence for that first trend, noticing different nomoi. Early thinkers like Xenophanes pointed out how different cultures depicted gods in their own image, hinting at cultural relativity. Hecataeus, the early geographer, certainly knew about diverse places and peoples. But the real explosion of comparative ethnography comes later, right in the Sophistic period. Think Herodotus, the father of history, rambling through his histories, filled with fascinating, sometimes bizarre, accounts of Egyptian, Persian, Scythian, and other customs. And the Hippocratic writers, in texts like Airs, Waters, Places, were comparing peoples based on their environment and, crucially, their nomoi. This wasn't just idle curiosity, it was laying the groundwork for seeing rules and customs as varied human creations, not universal truths. The second trend was storytelling about how we got from Stone Age to city-states. Again, Xenophanes might have touched on progress, but interpretations vary. Anaxagoras talked about other worlds, but not much about societal development. Where we really see this theme emerge is in tragedy. Prometheus Bound paints this vivid picture of a prehistoric state of nature where humans lack skills and knowledge, only to have Prometheus bring them civilization, including writing, farming, and yes, presumably social structures. Sophocles' Antigone, while focused on immediate conflict, reflects on human achievements, listing technical and political advances, including nomos. Even medical texts pondered how ancient humans discovered healing arts. These narratives, whether mythological or framed as history, implicitly show humanity moving from a simpler state towards complex societies governed by norms. Okay, so we've got these two trends, noticing different customs and telling origin stories. But here's the catch, Bet points out. Just having these ideas doesn't automatically lead to the physis-nomos split. Look at Herodotus again. His famous story about Darius trying to convince Greeks and Indians to swap burial customs highlights how deeply rooted nomoi are in each culture. Instead of concluding nomoi is just human stuff, Herodotus uses it to reinforce Pindar's idea that nomos is still powerful, maybe even divine, and warns against mocking religious practices. He's not thinking along the lines of nomos versus physis. Similarly, those origin stories, like Prometheus Bound, focus heavily on technological skills techne, less on the development of social laws nomos. Diodorus Siculus, drawing on older sources, talks about early humans developing language and forming groups for safety. But again, the social-political evolution gets short shrift. So these trends set the stage, but the actual leap requires a specific philosophical move. And that move seems to land squarely with Archelaus. Remember him? Teacher of Socrates, student of Anaxagoras. We don't have tons of his work, but sources like Diogenes Laertius and Suda attribute a very clear statement to him. The just and the shameful are not by physis but by nomos. Boom. There it is. Justice and morality aren't baked into our nature. They're products of human agreement and legislation. Another source, Hippolytus, adds a neat detail. Humans started from mud like animals, then separated and created leaders, laws, skills, cities, all human constructs. Notice the absence of any divine role in ethics or politics here. The god mentioned elsewhere by Archelaus is just a physical principle. This looks like the fully formed physis nomos contrast, placing ethics squarely under the nomos umbrella, built upon a natural starting point. Whether Archelaus himself drew further conclusions from this, we can't say for sure, but this attribution marks a pivotal moment. Now, does this mean only sophists use this contrast? Not entirely. Aristophanes' comedy Clouds famously skewers intellectuals who seem to be Archelaus among others for arguing that if laws are just human inventions nomoi, then why obey them? The play suggests this leads to chaos like sons beating fathers. But Aristophanes is highlighting the perceived danger, not necessarily stating it was Archelaus' own conclusion. And look at Herodotus, or the Hippocratic writers again. They mention nomos versus physis, like contrasting arbitrary borders with the true extent of land, or how head-binding becomes natural physis after being accustomed nomos. But they don't really dig into the implications, or build a systematic theory around it. The difference seems to be that while the terms and basic contrast were floating around, the Sophists, particularly as portrayed by Plato, really took it upon themselves to explore its consequences, to use it as a lens for examining society, ethics, and human values in depth. They developed it into a philosophical tool. Let's look at Protagoras, the first sophist. Plato gives him a long speech in his dialogue, and while we know Plato sometimes reshapes his teachers, this speech feels authentic to Protagoras' known concerns, like whether virtue can be taught. Here's the gist. Protagoras tells a story about early humans lacking the skill techne of politics, specifically justice and shame. Without these, communities couldn't function. So, these essential social attitudes had to be given to everyone. This supports Athenian democracy, giving everyone a voice. Crucially, Protagoras argues that virtue, including justice, isn't something we're born with physae. It's learned through teaching and practice, reinforced by punishment. And what guides this learning? Laws nomoi, described as the findings of good lawgivers. So Protagoras presents a sophisticated picture. We have a natural capacity for social life physis, but we need laws and socialization nomos to actually develop those virtues. It's not a clash, but a partnership. Nomos builds on physis. Interestingly, this allows for revising laws if needed, unlike some interpretations. But not all sophists saw it as a partnership. Some, like Antiphon and Hippias, leaned towards seeing nomos as problematic, something that imposes artificial divisions against a more natural state. Antiphon argues that fundamentally, by physis, we're all similar, capable of being Greek or barbarian. Our current divisions, our sense of otherness, is a deviation from this natural equality, likely caused by nomos, the laws and customs that create these barriers. Fragments suggest he might even have told the story about how society started, contrasting the natural equality with the imposition of laws. Hippias echoes this in Plato's Protagoras, pleading for unity among philosophers, saying, by nature, like is akin to like, but nomos, being a tyrant over humans, forces many things on us against nature. This line directly frames nomos as an oppressive force. This line of thought clearly challenges the status quo, questioning hierarchies like slavery, or perhaps even the position of women, suggesting they go against our natural equality. Then there's the other side of the coin, nomos as a restraint on our natural desires, particularly self-interest. Antiphon himself offers a chilling take. Justice consists in following the laws of the city. But then he says, a person would therefore use justice most advantageously for himself, if he treated the laws as important when there are witnesses, but matters of nature when left alone without witnesses. Ouch! Laws are shackles on nature, nature's dictates are free. This is a direct challenge to conventional morality. Plato's characters Thrasymachus in the Republic and Callicles in the Gorgias take this even further. Thrasymachus declares justice is simply the interest of the stronger faction that makes the laws, implying laws serve power, not objective good. Injustice, then, is pursuing your own interest, which suits the weak. Callicles goes wild, rejecting conventional morality entirely, and advocating a law of nature that demands pursuing one's own interest, even dominating others. Now, Plato might be caricaturing here, but the existence of Antiphon's fragment shows this kind of antinomian thinking was definitely circulating. Of course, this antinomian stuff didn't go unchallenged. An anonymous text, possibly from the late 4th or 5th century BCE, directly responds to those who would reject nomos. This author argues forcefully for eunomia, lawfulness, as absolutely necessary for human coexistence. He warns against thinking grabbing more is virtue or obeying laws is cowardice. Interestingly, he acknowledges that law and justice are strongly bound in nature, human nature, and even quotes Pindar's nomos is king positively, unlike Hippias. Then there's a fascinating fragment, possibly by Critias, Plato's cousin, describing a violent state of nature overcome by nomos. But people cheated, following rules only in public. The solution? A clever guy invented gods. The idea was that gods are always watching, ensuring compliance even when alone. Religion then is presented as a useful fiction, a social tool to enforce nomos. But the text explicitly calls this a fiction. It pushes towards antinomianism. Why follow rules if you think you won't get caught? A real head-scratcher, pushing conflicting ideas simultaneously. One more major sophist, Prodicus, deserves mention here. He's often seen as an agnostic, maybe even an atheist. The key text says he believed that belief in gods arose from confusing gratitude for beneficial things, helpful natural phenomena, or useful human inventions, with actual divinity. People revered the sun, rain, or clever inventors as gods. On this view, religion itself could be seen as a kind of nomos, a human invention, a set of norms and beliefs developed by society. Some texts even quote Prodicus using a verb related to nomos, suggesting he saw belief in gods as treating them as a norm. This connects beautifully with the idea that if religion is a human construct, then laws and social institutions are too. It raises the question, what aspects of human life are truly natural versus socially constructed? Given Protagoras' own agnosticism and his famous work on the gods, it's tempting to imagine he explored similar ideas about the social functions of religious belief, even if he doubted the existence of gods. So what's the big takeaway from all this? First, this idea of viewing religion as a human phenomenon, a nomos, seems incredibly important for understanding how the physis-nomos distinction really took off. Once you start thinking of belief in gods as something societies create, it becomes much harder to see laws and other social institutions as anything but also human creations. And once you've done that, you naturally start asking, what parts of human existence are truly fundamental, our physis, versus just societal conditioning, our nomos? This whole debate, especially the antinomian versions, really gets into the heart of metaethics. Are values objective? Why should we be moral? Treating nomos as human choice doesn't automatically kill objectivity, but it definitely forces us to confront the status of ethical values. Plato's Republic, with its famous challenges from Thrasymachus and Glaucon, is essentially Plato wrestling with these very sophistic arguments. And honestly, the question why be moral is still a massive deal today, showing the lasting power of these ancient debates. Finally, this focus on physis versus nomos really sets the traditional sophists apart from Socrates, despite his connection to Archelaus. The sophists, in exploring how norms and values are human constructs, seem closer in spirit to Nietzsche's call for philosophers to create values. Socrates, on the other hand, was all about discovering objective truths about virtue and the good life, finding them, not creating them. He didn't really engage with the diversity of nomoi or the origins of civilization in the way some sophists did. So, in this crucial aspect of their philosophical approach, it might actually be Socrates and Plato who seem like the odd ones out, the outliers compared to the broader intellectual currents of their time. That's a thought to chew on.